In the 41st millennium, humanity had cataloged 10,000 xenos species, each more nightmarish than the last. The Imperium's vast archives contained terrors that could unravel sanity with a glance, creatures that fed on souls, and abominations that wore human flesh like poorly fitted clothing. Yet for all their exhaustive documentation of the galaxy's horrors, they had no designation for what fell from the bleeding sky above Glacius Septima that night. The frontier world was a frozen hell, valued only for the promethium refineries buried beneath its permafrost. Guardsman Mikhael Kovar had drawn perimeter patrol, a punishment detail after being caught with contraband amasek. His breath crystallized in the recycled air of his rebreather as he trudged through waist-deep snow, laser rifle clutched in numb fingers. The patrol route took him past the impact crater, a wound in the ice that still smoldered despite the sub-zero temperatures. He should have reported it immediately, should have called for his sergeant and maintained proper Imperial Guard protocol, but Mikhael was young, only 3 years into his service, and curiosity, that most dangerous of human traits, drew him to the crater's edge. The thing at the bottom looked like oil given shape and malice. It writhed in the snow, a mass of gleaming black that seemed to drink in the light from his luminator pack. No heat signature, no movement pattern he recognized. It simply existed, a pool of living darkness that defied the natural order. When it surged up the crater wall toward him, Mikhael's training finally kicked in. He fired. The laser bolt punched through the black mass, superheating the snow behind it into steam. But the thing didn't slow. It flowed like liquid shadow, faster than anything that size should move, and before Mikhael could chamber another shot, it had reached him. The symbiote hit his exposed neck like freezing oil, and Mikhael's scream died in his throat as the alien entity poured itself into his body through every pore, every orifice. His nervous system lit up with agony as foreign cells rewrote his biology at the molecular level. He felt his muscles tear and rebuild themselves, felt his bones reinforce with something harder than calcium, felt his mind suddenly shared with an intelligence so utterly alien that his sanity teetered on the edge of collapse. Hungry, cold, pain. Where? The voice wasn't sound. It erupted directly into Mikhael's thoughts, a psychic pressure that felt nothing like the sanctioned psychers he'd seen from a distance during basic training. This was raw, primal, desperate. "Get out," Mikhael gasped, clawing at his own skin. His fingers found flesh that shifted like wet clay, reforming instantly behind his frantic scratching. "Emperor, preserve me. Get out!" "Host, need host, dying without—" The symbiote's panic mirrored Mikhael's own. It wasn't attacking him, it was drowning, and he was a life raft in an alien ocean. The realization penetrated his terror just enough for rational thought to resurface. Whatever this thing was, it was terrified, lost, alone. Just like he'd been 3 years ago, when the Imperial tithe had taken him from his agro-world family and thrown him into the grinding machinery of the Astra Militarum. "Stop," Mikhael whispered. "Stop fighting. Just stop." The invasion slowed. The symbiote settled into his tissues like it was sighing in relief, and suddenly Mikhael could feel it, not as an intruder, but as an extension of himself. His vision sharpened until he could count individual snowflakes in the darkness. His hearing picked up the distant rumble of the refinery servitors 3 kilometers away. His body thrummed with strength that had nothing to do with Imperial augmentation or combat stems. Better. Host is compatible. Grateful. "What are you?" Mikhael asked, but before the symbiote could answer, searchlights cut through the night. His patrol squad had noticed his absence. "Kovar, report," Sergeant Vasquez's voice crackled over the vox. The black mass retreated beneath Mikhael's skin, leaving him looking perfectly human, except for his dilated pupils and the faint sheen of sweat on his face despite the cold. The symbiote had understood the danger instinctively, understood that revealing itself would mean death for them both. "Hide, survive, together. Contact at impact site, Sergeant," Mikhael responded. "Negative on hostiles. Appears to be meteoric debris. Requesting Mechanicus survey team."
Over the next 3 days, Mikhael learned to coexist with the entity that now lived inside his flesh. The symbiote, it had no name, only a vague concept of we and together, was adapting to the 41st millennium as frantically as Mikhael was adapting to it. It fed on his adrenaline, his emotions, even the background psychic radiation that permeated real space this close to the cicatrix maledictum. In return, it made him faster, stronger, nearly immune to the cold that had plagued him since deployment. But it was hungry, so terribly hungry. The symbiote craved penethylamine, specific proteins that human brains produced in abundance. It could synthesize some from Mikhael's own biochemistry, but not enough, not nearly enough. The hunger gnawed at them, both a constant low-grade suffering that made Mikhael's hands shake during morning drill. "You look like grok shit, Kovar," Corporal Henris observed during mess hall rotation. "Catching frost fever?" "Just tired," Mikhael lied, forcing himself to eat the reconstituted protein paste. The symbiote absorbed the nutrients greedily, but it wasn't enough. It needed something the Imperial Guard rations couldn't provide. That night, during his bunk rotation, the hunger reached critical mass. The symbiote surged through his body without permission, transforming his hand into a black, clawed endopendage that slammed against the bulkhead hard enough to dent plasteel. The other guardsmen in his barracks woke instantly, laser guns trained on him. What in the Emperor's name? Mikhael forced the transformation to reverse, his hand returning to normal flesh even as the symbiote howled in protest inside his mind. Nightmare, just a nightmare. But Sergeant Voska was already reaching for the Vox. "Medical emergency, Barracks 12. Possible mutation. Get me a sanctioned psyker now." The symbiote understood what that meant, even if Mikhael didn't want to admit it. They had been discovered, and in the Imperium of Man, discovery meant only one thing: purging. "Run," the symbiote urged. "Run."
The ice storms of Glacia Septima could flay exposed flesh from bone in minutes, but Mikhael barely felt the razor winds as he sprinted across the tundra. The symbiote had transformed his standard-issue fatigues into a seamless black second skin that shed the cold like water. His legs pumped with inhuman strength, each stride covering 3 times the distance his unenhanced body could manage. Behind him, searchlights from the refinery complex carved through the blizzard, and he heard the distinctive whine of sentinel walkers powering up for pursuit. "They hunt us. Why? We harm no one." "You don't understand," Mikhael panted, diving behind an ice ridge as last fire crackled overhead. "The Imperium doesn't care about intent. Mutation is heresy. Xenos contamination is death. We're both dead if they catch us." The symbiote rippled beneath his skin, confused and angry. It had bonded with dozens of hosts across multiple worlds in its own universe, but never had it encountered a species so violently opposed to cooperation, so willing to destroy what it didn't understand. The psychic background noise of the 41st millennium, billions of voices screaming prayers to a corpse god, made even less sense to its alien consciousness. A sentinel rounded the ridge, its searchlight pinning Mikhael in place. The pilot's voice boomed through external Vox speakers. "Guardsman Kovar, by order of Commissar Drenz, you are to submit to immediate purification rites. Resistance will be met with execution." "Let me fight. I can—" "No," Mikhael whispered. These were his brothers in arms, men he'd served beside for 3 years. He wouldn't kill them, couldn't. The decision was taken from him when the Prometheum tank behind the Sentinel exploded in a gout of superheated flame. The walker toppled, its pilot screams cutting off as the cockpit crumpled against frozen stone. Mikhael spun to see a figure emerging from the storm, robed in crimson, crackling with barely contained power, flanked by 2 hulking warrior servitors whose augmetic arms ended in bolt cannons.
Inquisitor Ray-Jan Voss of the Ordo Xenos had arrived. "Fascinating," the Inquisitor said, his voice amplified by a Vox implant that made it sound like gravel grinding against steel. "Scans indicate xenos contamination, yet the subject retains human cognitive function. This warrants study." The servitors raised their weapons. Mikhael felt the symbiote coil like a spring, ready to transform him fully, to fight with every ounce of their combined strength. But Inquisitors didn't come alone to frontier worlds. Somewhere in the storm, there would be stormtroopers, psychic nulls, maybe even an entire squad of
A hellgun barked, its focused laser beam punching through Mikhael's shoulder. He screamed, collapsing into the snow, and felt the symbiote immediately flood the wound with regenerative cells. The hole sealed in seconds, flesh knitting together in a display of healing that no unaugmented human could replicate. Regeneration beyond standard Astartes capability, Inquisitor Voss noted clinically, speaking into a data slate held by a servo skull. Subject displays characteristics consistent with Tyrannid bioadaptation, yet lacks hive mind psychic signature. Preliminary hypothesis: new xenos subspecies or demonic manifestation requiring warp presence analysis. "Demon, we are not..." The symbiote's protest died as it sensed something else in the storm, a presence that made its alien biology recoil in instinctive horror. A blank space in reality where psychic energy went to die. The pariah stepped from behind Inquisitor Voss, and Mikhael felt his soul scream. She was young, maybe 17, with dead eyes and a collar of sanctified bronze around her throat. A psychic null, a human born without presence in the warp, walking anathema to everything that relied on the Imperium. The symbiote, who drew sustenance from the background psychic radiation of reality, withered in her presence like a flower exposed to hard vacuum. Pain, pain, she is wrong, cannot exist. The creature reacts to Null Maiden Kess, Inquisitor Voss observed with satisfaction, which confirms warp-based physiology. Fascinating. Most xenos species show some warp interaction, but this level of distress suggests the entity is fundamentally psychic in nature. "I'm not a demon," Mikhael gasped, trying to crawl away from the pariah. The symbiote had retreated deep into his tissues, barely maintaining cohesion. "It's not from the warp. It came from somewhere else." Inquisitor Voss crouched beside him, his augmentic eye whirring as it focused. "There is no somewhere else, Guardsman. There is the Materium and there is the Immaterium. If your passenger came from beyond both, then it is either lying or too ignorant of its own nature to be trusted." He gestured, and the servitors seized Mikhael by his arms, hauling him upright. The pariah moved closer, and the symbiote screamed inside Mikhael's mind, not in words but in pure existential terror. It was dying, being unmade simply by proximity to something that shouldn't exist. "Please," Mikhael begged, "it's not hostile, it's just trying to survive." "Survival is insufficient justification for heresy," Voss replied. He drew a sleek pistol from his robes, not a las pistol or bolt pistol, but something of xenotech origin that hummed with barely contained energy. "However, immediate execution would waste valuable research opportunities. You will be transported to my vessel in orbit. There, we will separate you from your passenger. Painfully, I expect." The servitors dragged Mikhael toward a Valkyrie transport, its engines howling against the storm. The pariah followed at a careful distance, close enough to suppress the symbiote, far enough that Mikhael simply didn't die from soul death. As they loaded him into the gunship's hold, Mikhael caught a glimpse of the refinery complex in the distance, now swarming with Imperial Guard units conducting a full sweep.
"Sorry," the symbiote whispered, its mental voice barely audible. "Brought death to your brothers, brought Inquisition. Should have stayed in void, should have died alone." "No," Mikhael said softly, ignoring the suspicious glare from the stormtrooper guard sitting across from him. "You saved me from freezing during patrol 2 nights ago, saved me from hypothermia I didn't even know I had. We are in this together." "Together," the symbiote echoed, and despite the terror and pain and certain death waiting aboard the inquisitorial vessel, Mikhael felt something he hadn't experienced since leaving his homeworld: belonging. The Valkyrie lifted off, punching through the storm into the black sky where the Inquisitor's ship waited, a Gothic-class cruiser bristling with weapons and draped in devotional banners. Mikhael watched Glacia Septima shrink below him and wondered if he'd ever see ground again. Inquisitor Voss settled into the crash seat beside him, studying Mikhael like a particularly interesting specimen. "Tell me, Guardsman, does your passenger have a name?" Mikhael felt the symbiote stir, considering the question. It had never needed a name before. Names implied individuality, separation. It had always been we, plural and collective. But here, in this universe where everything was categorized, classified, and catalogued for potential extermination, perhaps a name was necessary. "Venom," it finally answered, pulling the word from Mikhael's own linguistic centers. "We are Venom." "Venom," Inquisitor Voss repeated, his augmentic eye glowing crimson in the transport's dim lighting. "How appropriate."
The inquisitorial vessel Unrelenting Truth was a cathedral of controlled paranoia, every corridor lined with sanctified silver, every junction watched by servo-skulls armed with purity seals and Auspex scanners. Mikhael spent 3 days in a containment cell that reeked of sacred oils and ozone, the walls carved with prayers that made the symbiote writhe in discomfort, not pain. It wasn't sensitive to faith the way demons supposedly were, but the psychic residue of 10,000 prayers left an uncomfortable pressure against its alien consciousness. Inquisitor Voss visited daily, accompanied always by Null Minden Kess. Each session followed the same pattern: questions about the symbiote's origin, capabilities, intentions, followed by increasingly invasive scans that left Mikhael vomiting blood and the symbiote barely coherent. They had learned that extreme heat caused it to recoil, that sonic weapons disrupted its cellular cohesion, that the pariah's presence was slow poison to its psychically resonant biology. "You persist in claiming it arrived via dimensional breach," Voss said on the 4th day, reviewing data on a flickering cogitator screen. "Yet our sensors detected no warp disturbance, no Geller field failure, no demotic incursion signature. Explain this discrepancy." "Not warp," the symbiote insisted, speaking through Mikhael's mouth in a voice that was neither fully his nor fully its. "Different place, different laws. Your warp is noise, screaming. We came from quiet spaces between stars." Voss's biological eye narrowed. "Heretical cosmology aside, your continued existence presents a theological problem. You are clearly xenos, yet you bond with humans in a manner disturbingly similar to Genestealer contamination, without the hive mind psychic signature. This suggests—" The ship's alarm shrieked, cutting him off. Red emergency lighting flooded the containment block as the Unrelenting Truth shuddered from impact. Voss's vox bead crackled with panicked reports. Genestealer cult uprising in lower decks. Security teams 3 and 7 down. They're heading for the engine rooms. The Inquisitor's expression shifted from clinical interest to cold fury. "Seal this block. Maintain watch on the xenos-contaminated subject." He swept from the cell, Null Maiden Cass following like a soulless shadow, leaving only 2 stormtroopers guarding Mikhael. The symbiote sensed opportunity. Guards distracted. Can escape. Can... "And go where?" Mikhael whispered. "We're on a ship in the void. Even if we reach an escape pod, we'll just die slowly instead of quickly." The sounds of combat grew closer, autoguns barking, lasguns hissing, and underneath it all, a chittering that made Mikhael's skin crawl.
He'd heard briefings about Genestealers during basic training, xenos horrors that implanted their genetic code into human hosts, creating hybrid cultists who worshipped the Tyranid hive fleets as gods. Entire worlds had fallen to their insidious corruption. The containment block's blast door exploded inward in a shower of molten metal. Through the smoke came things that had once been human, dockworkers and servitors twisted by alien genetics, their bodies warped into grotesque parodies of humanity. Extra arms ending in chitin claws, elongated skulls housing inhuman intelligence, purple-veined skin stretched tight over mutated musculature. The stormtroopers opened fire, their hellguns punching through the first wave of cultists. But there were too many, and they kept coming, climbing over their own dead with mindless devotion. One trooper went down screaming as a hybrid's claws tore through his carapace armor. The second managed 3 more shots before being overwhelmed. A cultist approached Mikhail's cell, its 3-fingered hand reaching for the control panel. It tilted its malformed head, studying him with 2 intelligent eyes. "Brother," it hissed in Gothic corrupted by Xeno's vocal cords. "Brother in change, join us. The star gods come. They will devour all. But we, the faithful, we will be consumed first. It is blessing. It is rapture." The symbiote recoiled in horror. "Wrong! Wrong! This is not bonding. This is violation, rewriting, erasure." Mikhael felt it too, the fundamental difference between what Venom did and what the Genestealers had done. The symbiote merged, adapted, collaborated. It enhanced while preserving identity. These hybrids had been hollowed out, their humanity stripped away and replaced with instinctive worship of cosmic predators. "We're nothing alike," Mikhael said.
The cultist's face twisted in something approximating rage. "You bear Xenos' gift, yet reject the truth? You are an abomination twice over, a human who accepts alien flesh, but not alien purpose." It raised its claws to strike. The symbiote exploded outward, transforming Mikhael in an instant. Black biomass flowed over his body, adding mass pulled from surrounding air molecules and his own stored fat reserves. He grew to over 7 feet, his arms becoming corded pillars of enhanced muscle wrapped in gleaming black armor skin. A white spider symbol blazed across his chest, not painted, but formed from the symbiote's own pigmentation. His face vanished beneath an eyeless mask dominated by a massive mouth filled with dagger-like teeth. "We are Venom," the bonded pair roared in perfect synchronization, their combined voice echoing like a bestial war cry. The cultist barely had time to register shock before Venom's fist pulverized its skull. The other hybrids attacked as one, and Venom met them with savage efficiency. Claws that could rend plasteel slashed through alien flesh. Strength that could bend iron bars snapped chitin-reinforced limbs like kindling. The symbiote's shape-shifting biology let them dodge attacks that should have been unavoidable, flowing around claw strikes and auto-gun rounds with liquid grace. But there were dozens of cultists, and even Venom's enhanced physiology had limits. A lucky strike opened their shoulder, and the symbiote had to divert resources to seal the wound. Another cultist Magus clamped lamprey teeth onto their leg, injecting Genestealer genetic material that the symbiote immediately identified and purged. But the process cost precious seconds. Need escape. Cannot win war of attrition. Mikhael's human consciousness agreed. They fought their way to the blast door, leaving broken cultist bodies in their wake, and plunged into the corridor beyond. The unrelenting truth had become a war zone, stormtroopers establishing defensive positions, while hybrids poured from access shafts like a tide of clawed nightmares. Somewhere above, Mikhael could hear the distinctive thunder of bolter fire, Inquisitor Voss and his retinue, fighting to retake the ship. They ran toward the docking bays, the symbiote's enhanced senses navigating the labyrinthian corridors with instinctive precision. Behind them, a cultist Magus, a 4th-generation hybrid nearly indistinguishable from human, raised a stolen autogun and fired. The rounds punched through Venom's back, and they stumbled. Healing. Need time. Need biomass. Mikhael finished. The symbiote needed raw material to regenerate,
and there was only one source available. The cultists themselves. What followed was feeding, pure and primal. Venom descended on the pursuing hybrids, and the symbiote didn't just kill, it consumed, absorbed their genetic material, broke down their proteins, used their alien-tainted biomass to fuel its own regeneration. The cultists' Genestealer DNA tried to corrupt the symbiote, to rewrite its cellular structure, but Venom's biology was too adaptable, too aggressive. It took what it needed and discarded the rest like poison. Tainted, wrong, but necessary. Survive. They reached Docking Bay 7 to find a Shark-class assault boat still sealed and functional, its pilot dead from cultist claws. Venom slithered into the cockpit, the symbiote extending tendrils to interface directly with the ship's machine spirit. It didn't understand Imperial technology, didn't need to. It simply bypassed every security protocol through brute force biological hacking, convincing the systems that they were authorized through sheer cellular persistence. The bay doors opened to the void, and Venom launched into the black, leaving the unrelenting truth to its internal war. As they cleared the ship's gravity well, Mikhael saw something that made his blood freeze. A space hulk drifting through the sector like a mountain of fused starships, crawling with Genestealer signatures that made the assault boat's auger array.
The mining colony of Sigma-7 Tertius clung to existence in defiance of common sense, a cluster of pressurized habitation domes connected by reinforced tunnels that burrowed deep into the moon's mineral-rich crust. 3,000 souls called it home, mostly indentured laborers, a handful of mechanicus overseers, and one deeply corrupt administratum official who skimmed 40% off every shipment and didn't ask questions about unregistered arrivals. Mikhael and Venom had been hiding there for 2 weeks, working the deep mines under a falsified designation. The symbiote's enhanced strength made Mikhael the most productive worker in his shift, which earned suspicious looks, but also enough throne gelt to buy food, water, and the synthesized adrenaline compounds the symbiote craved. They kept their heads down, avoided crowds, and tried very hard not to think about the Inquisitor who was certainly hunting them. It was in the rec dome, during off-shift hours, that everything went wrong. The preacher appeared on the third Sunday, setting up his makeshift pulpit near the communal eating area. He was young, charismatic, with burn scars on his hands and fervor in his eyes. "Brothers and sisters," he called, his voice carrying across the dome. "The Imperium lies to you, tells you to suffer, to slave, to die for an emperor who cares nothing for your pain. But there are older powers, truer powers, gods who reward devotion with strength, with transformation, with freedom." Mikhael felt the symbiote tense. Chaos, the screaming voices from the warp, can taste corruption in his words. A dozen miners gathered around the preacher, their expressions hungry. Mikhael recognized them, the disaffected, the bitter, the ones who'd been ground down by the Imperium's machinery until nothing remained but resentment. Perfect targets for chaos. The Prince of Pleasure offers sensation beyond Imperial suppression. The Blood God promises strength to break your chains. The Architect of Fate shows paths to elevation beyond your birth station. And the Lord of Decay, he offers acceptance, an end to suffering through joyful entropy. One of the miners, a woman named Katra, who'd lost her arm to a tunnel collapse and received only a crude augmetic in replacement, stepped forward. "What must we do?" The preacher smiled, and I saw something move beneath the man's skin. Simply accept the gifts offered. Simply say yes to power that the false emperor denies you. Should stop this, It's not our fight, Mikhael whispered, backing toward the tunnel exit. We draw attention, we die. The Inquisition is already hunting us. We can't afford. The preacher's head snapped toward Mikhael with unnatural speed. His eyes had changed, the pupils vertical slits surrounded by swirling colors that hurt to perceive. But you already carry something the Imperium fears, don't you, brother? I can taste it. Xenos taint, forbidden symbiosis. You're already damned in their eyes. The entire rectome fell silent. Dozens of eyes turned toward Mikhael, and he felt the symbiote coil defensively beneath his skin. Join us, the preacher urged, extending a scarred hand. The ruinous powers care nothing for purity doctrine. Xenos, human, demon, all are welcome in the embrace of chaos. Your passenger would thrive in the warp's ever-changing currents. No more hiding, no more fear, only glorious mutation and endless possibility. The offer was tempting. Emperor help him. It was tempting. The symbiote felt it too, the promise of acceptance, of a place in this hostile universe where they wouldn't be hunted simply for existing. The Chaos Gods didn't care about xenophobia or purity. They offered a third path between the Imperium's execution and lonely exile. Could be free, the symbiote whispered. Could be strong, No, Mikhael said flatly. The preacher's expression curdled. No. We've seen what your gods offer. Mikhael thought of the Genestealer cultists, hollowed out and filled with alien purpose. Different method, same result. Human will subsumed, identity erased, replaced with slavish devotion to inhuman masters. Correct, Venom agreed, its mental voice firming with conviction. We are partnership, equal, together. Not master and slave, not God and worshipper. The preacher's friendly facade shattered. His skin split like overripe fruit, revealing roiling pink flesh underneath that defied biological categorization. Tentacles erupted from his torso, tipped with lamprey mouths and sensory organs that shouldn't exist. The miners who'd gathered close began screaming, but the sound twisted mid-breath into ecstatic laughter as demonic corruption flooded into their bodies through proximity alone. Then you will be offerings instead, the demon preacher shrieked in a voice like breaking glass. The Prince of Pleasure will savor your resistance as you're remade into art. Venom exploded outward, transforming Mikhael in the span of a heartbeat. But this time was different. The symbiote had been feeding on synthesized compounds, had been healing from injuries, had been adapting to the 41st millennium's harsh psychic environment. Their transformation was more complete, more refined. White eye spots appeared on their otherwise featureless face mask. Muscular definition showed through the black biomass like living obsidian sculpture. They stood 8 feet tall, a pillar of controlled violence. The demon preacher lashed out with corruption-tipped tentacles. Venom caught them mid-strike, and the symbiote's cellular structure simply rejected the warp taint. Not through faith or psychic resistance, but through sheer biological incompatibility. Chaos corruption tried to rewrite Venom's DNA and found nothing to rewrite.
the symbiote cells existed in a state of constant controlled mutation that chaos couldn't manipulate any further.
"You are already change," Venom roared, ripping tentacles from the demon's body. "You cannot corrupt what is already perfect adaptation." They tore into the preacher with savage efficiency, claws shredding demonic flesh faster than it could regenerate. The symbiote wasn't just killing, it was consuming, absorbing the warp-touched biomass and filtering out the corruption, keeping only the raw energy. It was dangerous, like drinking poison and hoping your liver could process it fast enough. But Venom's adaptive biology made the impossible merely difficult. The corrupted miners attacked, their bodies already warping into tentacled monstrosities. Venom fought with brutal pragmatism, breaking necks, crushing skulls, ending transformations before they could complete. It wasn't mercy, it was necessity. Every second the demon preacher existed, more corruption bled into real space. Behind us, Mikhael's human awareness caught the threat the symbiote missed. Katra, the one-armed miner, now sporting 6 writhing appendages of pink flesh that ended in pincers and stingers. She'd been fully transformed, her humanity replaced entirely by demonic essence. She struck like a serpent, toxin-dripping stingers punching through Venom's back. The symbiote screamed, not in pain, but in fury. The venom was warp-tainted, designed to corrupt living tissue at the molecular level. It flooded through their shared bloodstream, and for a terrible moment, Mikhael felt his consciousness begin to fray, pulled towards something vast and hungry that promised pleasure so intense that it would shatter his sanity. No! The symbiote clamped down like a psychic tourniquet, isolating the corrupted blood in specialized bladders within their shared biology. Our host, our partner, not yours. They spun, grabbed Katra by her demonic appendages, and slammed her into the deck with enough force to crack the reinforced flooring. Once, twice, 3 times, until the demon animating her flesh gave up and dissipated back into the warp, leaving only a corpse that looked almost peaceful. The demon preacher made a final desperate lunge, tentacles wrapping around Venom's throat. "The Dark Prince will have you eventually," it hissed. "All things of flesh belong to." Venom's jaws opened impossibly wide and bit down on the demon's core mass, tearing out a chunk of warp stuff that tasted like screaming and perfume. The demon's manifestation collapsed, its anchor to real space severed, and it was dragged howling back into the Imperium. Silence fell over the wreck dome. Venom stood amid the carnage, breathing heavily, the symbiote slowly retracting back into Mikhael's skin. The surviving miners stared in absolute terror, pressed against the dome walls as far from Venom as possible. "You're one of them, a mutant, a heretic," a miner whispered. "No," Mikhael said, his voice hoarse. "We just saved your lives." "By being the same xenos filth the Imperium warns us about." The miner's hand moved toward an alarm panel. The symbiote could have stopped him, could have crossed the distance and silenced the alarm before it was triggered, but Mikhael held them back, because the miner was right in a way. They were different, they were other, and in the 41st millennium, different meant dangerous. The alarm wailed, and Mikhael knew their hiding was over. "Run again?" the symbiote asked, weary but willing. "No," Mikhael said, staring at the dead cultists, thinking of the Genestealer hybrids, the demon preacher, the Inquisitor who'd tried to vivisect them. "No more running. If we're going to survive in this universe, we need to prove we're not the enemy. We need to fight the things that actually deserve to be destroyed." Dangerous philosophy. We're a living weapon, bonded to a guardsman in a galaxy at war. Dangerous is what we do.
The Arbites came first, local enforcers in carapace armor, shock mauls crackling with energy, riot shields raised in textbook formation. Mikhael didn't transform, didn't run. He simply stood in the center of the rec dome, hands raised, while the symbiote maintained combat readiness just beneath his skin. "Guardsman Mikhael Kovar," the lead Arbites announced, reading from a data slate. "Wanted for desertion, suspected xenos contamination, and murder of Imperial personnel. You will submit to—" "Those cultists were chaos corrupted," Mikhael interrupted, gesturing to the bodies. "Check their genetic markers. Run purity scans. They were days away from summoning a full demonic incursion." The Arbites hesitated. Standard protocol said to shoot first when dealing with mutation, but the evidence was undeniable. Tentacled corpses, warp residue still smoking on the deck plates, scorch marks from demonic manifestation. One of them voxed for a sanctioned psyker, while the others kept weapons trained on Mikhael. The psyker arrived within minutes, an elderly woman whose eyes had been replaced with brass augmetics inscribed with protective wards. She surveyed the carnage, her psychic senses probing the warp's echo, and her expression shifted from suspicion to grim understanding. "Slaneshi cult. Early stage, but the corruption runs deep. The miners who died here," she knelt beside Katra's body, "were already lost. Whoever stopped this prevented a demonic breach that would have consumed the entire colony." The Arbites lowered his weapon slightly. "The suspect is still contaminated with xenos material." "Yes," the psyker agreed, turning her augmetic gaze toward Mikhael. "But not chaos, not tyrannid, something else." She stepped closer, and Mikhael felt the symbiote tense as her psychic probe brushed against their shared consciousness. "Fascinating. It's not possessing you. It's cooperating with you." "She understands," the symbiote whispered, surprised. "First one who truly sees. I see a weapon, a dangerous, unpredictable weapon that the Imperium will either try to control or destroy, likely both." She turned to the Arbites. "Seal this dome, quarantine all witnesses, and send word to Battle Fleet Obscurus something much worse than a single contaminated guardsman is coming." As if summoned by prophecy, the colony's void shields flared. Alarm klaxons wailed across every dome as something massive translated from the warp at the system's edge. Mikhael felt it through the symbiote's enhanced senses, a presence that was simultaneously empty and overwhelming, a psychic void that devoured light and hope in equal measure. The Space Hulk had followed them. No, not followed. Genestealers were patient. They'd seeded this system years ago, their cultists warming into positions of power across every mining colony and orbital station. The cult magus had been waiting, coordinating, and Mikhael's arrival had been the trigger they needed, not because of what he was, but because of who would come hunting him. The Imperial cruiser Unrelenting Truth dropped out of warp space 3,000 kilometers from the colony, its auger arrays already screaming warnings about the Hulk's approach. And aboard that ship was Inquisitor Voss, who'd been tracking Mikhael's stolen assault boat across 3 systems with the patience of a predator who knew his prey had nowhere left to run. "All hands to battle stations," the colony's Vox speakers blared. "This is not a drill. Repeat, this is—" The Hulk fired. Lance batteries that shouldn't exist on a derelict vessel carved through the void, and the colony's void shields buckled under the assault. One dome breached, explosive decompression killing 40 miners in seconds. The Arbites scrambled to establish defensive positions while the Mechanicus overseers frantically attempted to reroute power to the failing shields. Mikhael stood frozen, his tactical training warring with his survival instinct. The Hulk was here because of him. The Inquisitor was here because of him. Hundreds would die in the crossfire. And for what? Because he'd bonded with something the Imperium couldn't categorize? No, the symbiote corrected. They die because this galaxy is dying. Has been dying for 10,000 years. We did not cause this. We are simply visible. Visible enough to be blamed, Mikhael said bitterly. The psyker grabbed his shoulder, her mechanical eyes blazing with sudden intensity. Then be visible doing something that matters. The Inquisitor's ship is undermanned. Half his crew died fighting the cultist uprising you escaped from. The Hulk is seated with thousands of Genestealers. This colony has perhaps 1 hour before being overrun. You want to prove you're not a threat? Prove you're an asset. She offers alliance, temporary, tactical. She's offering me a chance to die fighting instead of die running, Mikhael corrected. But the psyker was right. He'd spent 2 weeks hiding, and it had changed nothing. The galaxy's violence had found him anyway. At least this way, he could choose what he fought for. Venom emerged, the transformation smoother now than ever before. The black biomass flowed over Mikhael's body like living armor, and this time the symbiote added something new. White markings across their chest and arms that resembled Imperial oculas, deliberately mimicking the iconography. Not deception, but communication. A message. We fight for humanity, even if humanity doesn't fight for us. The Arbites recoiled, weapons rising, but the psyker waved them down. Stand down. He's with us. For now.
Venom sprinted toward the breach, moving faster than unaugmented humans could track. The symbiote's biology adapted to the thinning atmosphere, creating temporary respiratory bladders that could extract oxygen from near vacuum. They reached the compromised dome to find the first wave of Genestealers already crawling through the hull breach. Hundreds of them, four-armed nightmares with carapace armor that could shrug off lasgun fire. Different than cultists. Pure strain. Much stronger. Then we hit harder, Mikhael growled. Venom launched into the swarm like a black missile, claws extended from their fingers, not the symbiote's usual organic blades, but something new the symbiote had synthesized after consuming Genestealer biomass on the inquisitorial ship. Chitin diamond composite claws that could pierce even Tyranid armor. They tore through the first rank of xenos with surgical precision, the symbiote's combat instincts perfectly synchronized with Mikhael's guard training. But there were too many. For every Genestealer they killed, 3 more poured through the breach. Venom fought with desperate efficiency, but even their enhanced stamina had limits. A pure strain's claws opened a gash across their ribs. Another's fangs punched through their shoulder. The symbiote healed the wounds instantly, but each regeneration cost biomass they couldn't afford to lose. Need help. Cannot hold alone. As if in answer, bolter fire thundered from the colony's defensive positions. The Arbites had rallied, establishing overlapping fields of fire that cut down Genestealers by the dozen. The psyker stood behind them, her brass eyes glowing as she erected a psychic barrier that slowed the Genos' advance. It wasn't enough, would never be enough against a full Hulk worth of Genestealers, but it bought precious seconds. Then, the unrelenting truth opened fire. Lance batteries designed to crack planetary fortresses carved through the Space Hulk's superstructure. Torpedo spreads detonated in its landing bays, vaporizing entire broods of xenos. The Hulk returned fire, but the inquisitorial cruiser danced through the void with improbable grace, its captain clearly a veteran of 100 naval battles. A Thunderhawk gunship screamed through the breach, its assault cannon shredding the remaining Genestealers. The boarding ramp dropped, and Inquisitor Voss emerged, flanked by stormtroopers, and Mikhael's heart sank. Null Maiden Kess. Guardsman Kovar, Voss said calmly, as if they were meeting for afternoon recaf instead of a mid-Xenos invasion. You've led me on quite the chase. Venom started to retreat, but the pariah's presence pressed against them like a suffocating blanket. The symbiote withered, barely maintaining cohesion, and Mikhael felt himself separating from Venom as their bond frayed under nullfield pressure. Please, Mikhael gasped. The Hulk! Help them stop the Hulk! Voss studied him with his augmetic eye, calculating, assessing. Why should I? My mission was to capture you for study. The colony's survival is secondary. But we can help, Mikhael insisted. Venom consumed Genestealer genetic material. We know their pheromone signals, their hive communication protocols. We can infiltrate the Hulk, sabotage it from inside, but only if you call off your pariah. Risky, very risky, asking predator to spare prey. The Inquisitor was silent for 10 seconds that felt like 10 years. Behind him, the colony's shields failed completely, and another dome breached. More miners died. The Space Hulk began its final approach, preparing to ram the station and deploy its full complement of Xenos horrors. "Kess, stand down," Voss ordered, finally. 3 meters distance, maintain suppression, but don't disrupt the entity completely. The pressure eased. Venom surged back, reconnecting fully with Mikhael, and they gasped in relief. "You will board the Hulk with my stormtroopers. You will locate and destroy its plasma drives, crippling its ability to maneuver. And when this is over, you will submit to containment without resistance. Those are my terms." "Agreed," Mikhael said without hesitation. "Agreed," Venom echoed. The Thunderhawk launched, carrying Venom and a squad of stormtroopers toward the Space Hulk's gaping mouth. As they crossed the void, Mikhael saw the true scale of what they faced. A mountain of fused starships held together by Genestealer resin and millennia of accumulated debris, crawling with xenos that outnumbered the colony's population 100 to 1. "We're going to die," the symbiote observed. "Probably," Mikhael agreed. "But we'll die doing something that matters. Together, together." The Thunderhawk punched through the Hulk's outer hull, and Venom leapt into the darkness, ready to prove once and for all that they were more than the Imperium's fears made manifest. They were a weapon, and weapons could choose their targets.
The plasma drives died in a cascade of superheated azure light, their core reactors breached by shaped charges placed with desperate precision. Venom and the stormtroopers barely made it to the extraction point before the chain reaction began, the Space Hulk tearing itself apart from within as uncontrolled fusion consumed deck after deck of ancient metal and xenos resin. They'd lost 3 stormtroopers in the depths, good soldiers who'd fought beside a xenos-bonded abomination without question because the Inquisitor had ordered it. Mikhael would remember their names. The symbiote would carry their genetic echoes, absorbed from blood spilled in common cause. The unrelenting Kruth picked them up as the Hulk's death throes lit the void like a second sun. Thousands of Genestealers died screaming into vacuum, their hive-mind connections severed, their purpose annihilated. The mining colony survived with 60% casualties. Horrific by civilian standards, miraculous by Imperial Guard metrics. Inquisitor Voss met them in the hangar bay, Null Maiden Kess at his side, but maintaining the agreed-upon distance. Venom didn't retract, didn't hide. They stood at full height, black biomass gleaming under harsh lumens, white spider markings stark against their chest. "You upheld your end of the bargain," Voss said, his augmetic eye recording everything. "The question now is what to do with you." "We could kill us," Mikhael offered. "It's what we expected from the beginning." "I could," Voss agreed. "The Ordo Xenos has purged threats far less anomalous than yourself, but I am not in the business of wasting useful tools." He gestured to a data slate held by a nearby servo skull. "My ship is undermanned. My investigation into Genestealer infiltration across this sector requires assets capable of operating in hostile conditions, and you have proven effective." "He offers service, controlled, monitored, but alive." "Under your command," Mikhael asked, "as a sanctioned xenos. The Imperium has precedent for such arrangements, Jokero weaponsmiths, crude mercenaries employed by rogue traders, even the occasional captured Tau technology specialist. You would be unconventional, but not unprecedented. You would operate under my direct authority, deployed only against threats I deem appropriate. In return, you continue breathing." It wasn't freedom. It was a longer leash with a heavier collar. but it was also something Mikhael hadn't dared hope for since that first night on Gletsia Septima. A purpose. A place in the endless war that didn't end with a bullet through his skull or dissection on a laboratory table. "What's the alternative?" Mikhael asked, though he already knew. Voss's expression didn't change. Kes steps forward. The symbiote dies screaming. You die shortly after, either from separation trauma or a mercy shot. Your remains are incinerated and your records expunged. The Imperium forgets you existed. Not much choice, the symbiote observed. There's always a choice, Mikhael corrected silently. It's just rarely a good one. Venom's massive form shifted, the symbiote flowing and condensing until Mikhael stood in his original human shape. Only the faint sheen of black beneath his skin revealing Venom's presence. It was a gesture of trust, of submission, of acceptance. "We'll serve," Mikhael said, "but not blindly. If you order us to purge innocence, to execute children because they might be tainted, to become the monsters the Imperium fears, we refuse. We'll die first." For the first time, Inquisitor Voss smiled. It was not a kind expression. "Guardsmen, I hunt genuine threats to humanity's survival, not farmers who prayed wrong or children with minor mutations. If I wanted mindless executioners, I'd recruit Death Corps of Creed. I want soldiers who think, who adapt, who survive when the odds say they shouldn't." He extended his hand, not for a handshake, but to transmit data via a haptic interface in his palm. "Your first assignment, 3 systems spinward, an entire cardinal world's worth of pilgrims have gone silent. Initial reports suggest Genestealer infiltration, but the patterns are wrong. Too fast, too aggressive. I suspect something worse." The Inquisitor turned to leave, then paused. One final thing. The symbiote consumed Genestealer material and survived. It absorbed demonic corruption and filtered it clean. That level of adaptive biology is unprecedented. Dangerous, certainly, but potentially invaluable against the galaxy's worst threats. Do not make me regret allowing you to continue existing. Voss departed, with Kes trailing behind, leaving Mikhael alone in the hangar bay, surrounded by stormtroopers who watched him with expressions ranging from cautious respect to barely concealed revulsion. "We survived," Venom whispered, its mental voice carrying equal parts exhaustion and wonder. "Against Imperium, against chaos, against tyrannid swarms, we survived." "We did more than survive," Mikhael said quietly, staring at his hands, human hands that could become claws capable of rending ceramite, that carried within them an alien intelligence that had chosen partnership over predation. "We found something I didn't think existed in the 41st millennium." "What?" "A third path. Not Imperium's blind faith, not Chaos's corruption, not xenos domination or extinction. Something new, something that adapts." The symbiote rippled beneath his skin in what might have been agreement or amusement. In galaxy where everything stagnates for 10,000 years, adaptation is heresy. "Then we're heretics," Mikhael said with a grim smile, "but we're useful heretics. And in the Imperium of man, usefulness buys survival." He boarded the shuttle that would take him to his new quarters, not a cell, but an actual cabin with a bunk and personal effects locker, the first real accommodation he'd had since this nightmare began. As the shuttle lifted off, Mikhael looked back at the dying space hulk, its burning wreckage spreading across the void like embers from a funeral pyre. Somewhere in the Imperium's endless war machine,
There was now a guardsman bonded to a xenos symbiote, serving an inquisitor who collected useful monsters the way other men collected weapons. It was insane. It was unprecedented. It was survival. And in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, where there was only war, survival was the only victory that mattered. Venom settled deeper into Mikhael's cells, the two consciousnesses intertwining until the boundary between host and symbiote blurred into something singular. They would face cardinal worlds consumed by darkness. They would hunt cultists and xenos and things that had no names. They would walk the knife's edge between damnation and redemption, never fully trusted, never fully free. But they would walk it together. "We are Venom," they whispered into the darkness of their quarters, and the words were both promise and prayer. "And we will endure." Outside, the stars burned cold and indifferent, and the galaxy ground on in its eternal cycle of violence. But somewhere in that cosmic meat grinder, a human and an alien had found common cause, had proven that even in the 41st millennium's rigid orthodoxy, evolution was still possible. Whether the Imperium would allow that evolution to continue remained to be seen. But Venom would fight for that chance, would adapt, survive, and protect those who couldn't protect themselves, even if the Imperium itself became the enemy. Because in the end, that was what made them different from Genestealers, from demons, from all the galaxy's predators. They chose, and choice, however constrained, was the last bastion of humanity. The Emperor might not protect those who bonded with xenos, but Venom would protect them anyway.